Last week, we laid down the foundation of Shaar Hayichud Vehaemunah. This idea that at every moment everything is being recreated anew because were Hashem to withdraw the creative energy from this world for a moment, everything would cease to exist. Right? Everything would be soyu v'vayu. I'm not even sure soyu v'vayu. That was after the world was created. If Hashem would take away his energy, it would be before. It would be like it was before soyu v'vayu. It would be ayin v'efes, absolute nothingness. Soyu v'vayu means chaos. We're talking.
Was emptiness, vacuum, black.
The world, but there was an earth there was a vacuum on it, and there was
nothing there.
Yeah,
nothing alive.
But we're talking here. The world would revert to absolute nothingness, which means that the world requires the constant infusion of energy from Hashem in order to keep it going. That is going to be the foundation of the entire Shaar Hayichud Vehaemunah, which we're going to build on. There's going to be a lot of different principles that are going to be impacted by this foundation, which we learned last week. And the first thing we're going to learn about this week is about Hashgacha Pratis and about miracles. When it comes to miracles, there's something very funny, which is, if you go out into the world and you stop a so-called secular Jew, there's no such thing really as a secular Jew, but every Jew is holy. But a self-described what?
A Jew thinks he's secular.
A Jew thinks he's secular, right?
Okay, that's good.
And you tell them, do you believe in God? Chances are they'll say yeah. Chances are they'll say yeah. God created the world. Is God the big boss? Yeah. Do you believe that the Red Sea really split and divided for the Jewish people? I'm not so sure about that. That part I'm not so sure about. Do you believe that Avram was thrown into a fiery furnace and he came out alive? Or that's a medrash, but even what we have straight out in the Tanakh, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, do you believe that? That I'm not so quite so sure about. Yeah, that's too much. Yeah, did the water of the Nilus really turn into blood? That's part of the cultural legends of our people. But is it factual? That's another question altogether. But you think into that. What's the logic of that? If you believe in Hashem, you believe that Hashem created the world, then why can't he?
Why would this be any more difficult?
How and why would that be more difficult? Exactly.
Why would this be any more difficult?
Exactly.
This would be much easier.
After all, the biggest act is creating the world. After that, imagine the person who created and thought up and the entire computer. Does he know how to fiddle a little with the program and change the program? That instead of the font being blue, it should be red. So Hashem is going to change the font instead of the Yamsuf being okay. That's the Nilus. Instead of it being blue, it becomes red. Instead of the Yamsuf going down, it goes up. Why is that a big deal to accept? Why is that something which is so difficult? But the fact is, it is. We know that. And we're not talking about people who are professed atheists. Someone who's an atheist and says he doesn't believe that miracles happen, that's something which is logical, actually. I'm not saying it's logical to be an atheist. I'm not saying that necessarily that makes sense, to look around at the entire world and the perfection of the world and the sophistication and everything that goes on in the world and how everything works, and say it's logical to be an atheist. I'm not saying that. But if someone is an atheist, for whatever reason the person can logically justify being an atheist, then it absolutely makes sense not to believe in miracles. But we have this strange thing of people who believe in Hashem. They believe Hashem created the world, but at the same time, they doubt that miracles happen. Where does that come from?
Because you see the way the world operates, so by nature, and these things are not common occurrences. We haven't seen it ourselves in our lifetimes, so it's difficult to believe that it happened at any other time.
And Hashem can't make a miracle? He created the world?
Theoretically and logically.
Well, I don't think people go that far and say that they don't think God is powerful enough to do it. It's just that they don't see any evidence of it.
Right.
And that's
It's even a more the fundamental problem. A lot of the Jews in the United States, my relatives, my family, they went to school. They came here from Europe. They went to a secular school. They went to what's called a good college. They never went to a yeshiva. They were bar mitzvah, and after bar mitzvah, nothing. So no one presented a chumash to them. They don't know the difference between Bereshis and Shmos, and I was in the same category. They never spent 5 minutes contemplating and thinking about the creation of the universe.
Right, but these
they
people
studied physics and Einstein and Newton and all that good stuff, but they don't even know. They didn't spend 10 minutes in their adult life on this.
Right.
So it's hard to get that.
Yeah, but there's still an underlying. I understand what you're saying. Even if it isn't a conscious thought process, there's a subconscious thought process which we're going to get to over here. And again, these are the people who they do show up in Shol and Yom Kippur, and they pray to Hashem. They daven to Hashem. They do believe in Hashem.
Yeah.
And yet, Kriyas Yam Suf they have difficulty with. Why is that? So let's do this inside.
Please, paraphrase.
Paraphrase, yeah. Vihine, mikan shuva saminim. Based on what we learned in Perek Aleph, now we have the answer for the apikursim. Actually, if you look in the Rambam and Hilchos Tshuva, there's a difference between a min and an apikuros. A min is someone who believes in a higher power, believes in a supreme power, believes in Hashem, but has a distorted understanding or belief about Hashem. Apikuros is someone who rejects it all. So here we have the answer to the minim, those heretics, Vigilu Shadish to Usam, and now we're going to understand the source of their mistake. HaKoifrim Bashkacha Pratis, those who deny, they reject the idea of Ashkacha Pratis, the idea that Hashem is constantly involved in creation at every moment, and watching everything and directing everything. And also, and they reject the miracles of which are written in the Torah. What is the reason? What is the source of their problem? They wrongly imagine. Shemidamin Maseh Hashem, they compare the work of Hashem, Eisa Shemayim Va'aretz, who created heaven and earth, L'maisa Emish V'tach B'loisav, they compare it to the actions of the human being and the person's machinations. Kikashar Yatza L'tzayir of Kelim, when an artist, an artisan, creates a utensil. So let's say a person who's a potter makes a pot, or a person who makes a ceramic plate. So this utensil no longer requires anymore the hands of its creator. Even after the person's hands are removed from this keli, from this utensil, this person goes off and is walking in the streets. The utensil remains
The same thing.
same thing, exactly in its exact form. Exactly as it left from the hands of the one who fashioned it. The same thing. These fools, they compare Ma'aser Shemayim Va'aretz. They compare the act, Hashem's act of creating heaven and earth, to the act over here in this world of fashioning a utensil. However, their eyes are blocked, and therefore they can't see ha'hevdel hagadol, the great difference, the difference between the actions and the handiwork of a human being, shehu yesh mi yesh, which is only something from something. In other words, the rak shemeshana hatsura v'hatmuna. The only thing that the artisan is doing, the smith is doing, is changing the shape, changing the look, mitmunas chatichas kasef, changing it from the look and the shape of a chaticha, a slab of silver, l'tmunas keli, and now it's changing it into a keli. And they're comparing this l'maisa shamayim va'aretz shu yesh miyayin. They're comparing it to the act of creating heaven and earth, which is something from nothing. So the underlying principle is as follows. Yes, it happens very often that we do things, and we that which we do, we can walk away and the impact, the effect of which we have done remains. However, the rule, the big rule that Alter Rebbe is going to introduce over here is, this all is if you're not really making a real chiddush. There is no real chiddush, because you might want to say, the recipient of your act is essentially already contains within itself the ability to be also that other form which you have now introduced to it. So for example, when you have a slab of silver in front of you, is it more natural for silver to be a slab than it is for it to be a utensil? I mean, yes, that's its natural state. But is the nature of silver more amenable to being a slab? Does it resist becoming a utensil? Is it something which is no? Within the nature of silver is that if it's molded in a certain way, it could become a cup, it could become a becher, it could become a menorah. It's just as natural for silver to be a menorah as it is for it to be a slab. The slab of silver contains within it, even before the smith touched it, it already contains within itself the potential to become a keli. So therefore, because you're only changing the shape of it, and once again, it's a material which itself can readily assume that shape, so therefore you can remove your hand from it, and it will remain a keli. But when you want to introduce a real chidush, then if something's a real chidush, in other words, if the object is not inherently a keli, it's not inherently suited for that which you are doing, then you can't leave and assume that it's going to remain running on autopilot, but you constantly need to keep on doing what you're doing. And the example that Alter Rebbe is going to give is of Kriyas Yamsuf. So Hashem, we know how the Kriyas Yamsuf happened. Hashem didn't just say split. We know the pasuk says that Hashem ruach yam chasak miyoid, that Hashem brings a very powerful wind, and the wind which blows an entire night, and it causes the Yamsuf to split, and it causes the water to stand like a wall. And the water remains standing for the entire night. Now the next morning, when Hashem wants that the water should unsplit, he wants the water to go back down and to drown the Egyptians, the Mitzrim, does Hashem have to bring another wind from the opposite direction to knock the water down? No. So what happens?
He has to remove the wind.
All he has to do is remove the wind. But why? Once the wind picks the water up, shouldn't it take another opposing force, another wind, to bring the water back down?
It's a normal way.
And the answer is no. Why? Because the nature of water is not to stand. It's a chidush. It's a real chidush. Unlike silver, which can be either a slab or a becher, water you can't say, well, depending on how you put it, it could either go, it could run, it could flow downwards, or it could just stand like a wall. No, water doesn't stand like a wall. So therefore, if you want the water to stand like a wall, that's going to take a power at every single moment, keeping it that way, because it in of itself does not have the ability to be a wall, as opposed to silver, which does naturally have the ability to be. Yes.
And what about when every Shevet had ice and the sea the other?
That's a good question. We're not explaining the Midrashim over here because it's a little besides the point. We're not here to discuss Kriyas Yamsuf. We're actually just trying to bring out a certain idea here. Sorry.
The wind wasn't needed at all, though. Anyway, it was just Hashem's will.
Okay, so that's Taka. The Rambam says that, and there are those who say that the wind was.
If it was the power of the wind, then the people would not have been able to cross over either.
So
the wind would have affected them.
The Ramban says that the wind was a decoy, and it was only to get the Mitzrim to believe that it was the wind, and therefore to follow them into the water. But obviously the Alter Rebbe takes a different position over here. But I do want to point out, it doesn't really make a difference much. For the purposes of our conversation, Let's say theoretically, because the point here isn't the discussion about Kriyas Yamsuf, the point is we're trying to bring out a certain principle. So let's say theoretically that there was a wind that's strong enough to push water up as a wall. It's obvious that wind, you'd have to have a sustained wind in order to keep the water up, otherwise the water would collapse. So regardless of what happened over there, and the Alter Rebbe seems to be clearly indicating that he disagrees with that Ramban, and he takes the pasuk literally, which is that when the pasuk says "Vayelach Hashem ruach yam," that Hashem made a wind to blow, that the wind actually split the water, but irrelevant of how you actually understand what happened, the principle still remains. And there are many other examples that you can give of this idea, which is that when you want to introduce a chiddush, you can't teach that. In other words, you could teach silver to stay a becher because it's not really a chiddush for the silver. You can't teach the water to stand. So if you have a child, and we know that when children are born, they can't speak, which is maybe a good thing. We have some little peace and quiet for a few years, and then slowly but surely we teach our children to speak, and they speak and they speak and they speak until we wish they weren't speaking anymore.
They don't stop.
They don't stop, right? Okay, but once you teach your child to speak. Yes, he's listening in intently. Once you teach your child to speak, it's not you're going to say, okay, you know what, when I want him to stop speaking, I'm just going to stop teaching him to speak, and then he'll automatically stop. No, it doesn't work that way. You finish teaching your child how to speak, and your child keeps on speaking.
Baruch Hashem.
But what if you're a ventriloquist?
What's that mean?
A ventriloquist, you ever saw a show where the person comes with a puppet? And he projects his voice into the puppet, so it looks like the puppet is speaking. So, is it possible to say that the ventriloquist has trained his puppet so well to speak that even after the ventriloquist goes to sleep, the puppet keeps on speaking?
No way.
Why not? Because the child, yes, you taught the child to speak, but you're not giving the child the power to speak. The child contains the power to speak. The only thing is, that power needs to be somewhat developed and uncovered and trained. But ultimately, it's not a chiddush. But for a puppet to speak, that is a chiddush, and therefore, the moment the ventriloquist goes away, the puppet doesn't speak anymore. It's the same concept we have, the idea of a chiddush, right? Or for example, let's say you're running a production, and you have a bunch of high school, and you're running a production, and you have a bunch of high school students partaking. So you teach them to do their part, and then they can theoretically do the production even if you're not there. But what if you're a puppeteer and you do the production? Can you say, I'm going to teach these little dimensions? No, because again, that's a emes chiddush. That's a emes chiddush which it doesn't have. So the principle remains over here that when you want to introduce something which is a quality which something does not at all possess, the only way to make that thing continue having that quality is if it's constantly that quality is constantly being forced upon it because it doesn't naturally have it. And therefore the moment that the power that's forcing this thing to act in a way which is unnatural to it will go away, it's going to go away. So that's why you could take a slab of silver and you could make it into a becher. But how about if you take some orange juice and you say, I want to turn this into a becher? You can't, because it doesn't contain that quality to it. And if you wanted to make it into a becher, you'd have to create a special mold that would have to keep it in that shape and in that position, because again, it goes against its very nature. And a somewhat related note, the Rebbe points out that the Rogatchover says, the Rogatchover Goyen, Rogatchover was a great Goyen who lived in the early 20th century, and he said that the act of marriage is ongoing. When a person says Hayat Mukadeshes and marries, and the husband and wife marry each other, so that act, it's not as if it's a one-time act and from here on the husband and wife are just married, but that's something what's called the Pu'ul, in halachic terms, it's called the Pu'ul Nimshachas. It keeps on going, and at every single moment of the marriage, that marriage is being reenacted. And that has halachic implications. The fact that it's not something that happened once, but it's an act which is halachically reoccurring. And the Rebbe explains that according to Chassidus on a deeper level, man and woman are so opposite from each other that to keep them together is unnatural. It's almost like the magnets. Okay, but there's opposite. But there, two magnets that are alike can't hold together. Right. Okay. So it's not mamish an exact mushal.
No.
But the idea is that husband and wife, the only way to bind them together is that every single moment you have to have that power, the power of the kedushin, once again, keeping them together. Because it's not something that you just, it's one of my favorite jokes actually is about a husband. I might have said this before. Husband and wife, they go to a therapist. And the therapist turns to them and says, what's the problem? Why are you here? And the husband says, I have no clue, everything's good. That's what husbands always say. So the therapist turns to the wife and says, no, and what do you say? Why are you here? And she says, well, we're married 30 years and my husband doesn't tell me that he loves me. So the therapist turns to the husband and says, is that true? He says, yeah. The therapist says, why don't you tell your wife that you love her? So the guy turns to his wife and says, listen, honey, we got married 30 years ago, and then at that time I told you that I love you. If anything changes, I'll let you know. So if marriage is something which happens once and then it just self-sustaining, but it's no, because it's a chiddush. Because for two people to stay committed and focused on each other, especially a man and a woman who are so different in so many ways, physically, emotionally, physiologically, psychologically, intellectually, in every single which way we operate differently, it requires a constant glue to hold us together, which is the glue of the kedushin, which is happening at every moment, and also our efforts. We always, you can never just sit back and say, let's put this on cruise, we're good, we're married. No. At every single moment, you have to keep on working on that kesher. But that is this principle, which is that when something is a chidush, it needs a constant force to, right. So another mashal that's brought on Chassidus is the mashal of throwing a stone. Then you pick up a stone and you throw it. How long is the stone gonna keep on going and stay in the air? Well, you say, I threw it in the air. It should stay there until I go and take a ladder and bring it back down. No, because it's unnatural for a stone to fly, so therefore it's only going to stay in the air as long as the power of the person who threw it, the koyach hazorek, is still within that stone. Let's do this inside. So again, the reason why those people who deny the idea of Hashgacha Pratis and the miracles of the Torah is because they compare the act of Hashem creating the entire world, the heaven and earth, to the act of fashioning a keli. And the truth is, Shehu Yesh Mi'ayin. The truth is that when Hashem created the heavens and earth, that was an act of creating something out of nothing. V'hu pela gadol yoser mikriyas yamsuf al derech mashal. The act of creating heaven and earth, of creating this entire world, Yesh Mi'ayin, something from nothing, is a much greater wonder than Kriyas Yamsuf. Shohelech Hashem esayam beruach kodim asa kol halayla, that Hashem, He made the water go with a strong easterly wind the entire night. Vayibaku hamayim, and the water split. V'nitzvu k'maynedu k'choim, the water stood like a wall. V'ilu hifsek Hashem esaruach keregan, had Hashem, were Hashem to have stopped that wind for even a moment, hayu hamayim chayzim v'nigarim b'moirid kedarkam v'tivam, the water would have gone and flowed downward, as is their way, as is their nature. V'lo yikamu k'chema b'li safek, without any doubt. This is a logical idea that the water would not have remained standing. Now, why is creating the world an even greater wonder than this? The truth is that the fact that water flows downwards, why does it have its nature? This nature is also a created nature. It's a yesh mi'ayin. After all, a wall that's made out of stone stands on the stone without any wind. Just that the nature of water isn't that way. So in other words, when Hashem created the world, He gave different objects different natures. So stones, He gave a nature that if you pile one on top of another, it's going to remain standing and you can make a wall out of it. And water, He gave a different nature. So all we had to have by Kriyas Yamsuf is for the nature of an object that was already created to change. Hashem needed to change the nature. from that water, instead of at this moment having the nature of water, should be similar to a stone. The kol shkin v'kal v'chomer. How much more so b'brias yesh mi'ayin, when it comes to creating something from nothing. Shehi l'maylo mahateva. That's not something which is changing one nature into another nature. That's completely beyond nature. V'hafla upela yeser mikriyas yamsuf. And so much more wondrous than kriyas yamsuf. Al achas kama v'kama. How much more so shebistalkus koyach habirim na'nivra chas v'shalom. That if chas v'shalom, the power of the Creator, were to leave the creation, Yashuv anivra la'ayin ve'efes mamish, the creation would return to absolute nothingness. There has to be the koyach, the power of the poil, of the one who is acting benifal in the object which is being acted upon constantly. By the way, these words koyach hapoil benifal are the key words. Like Shaar Hayichud Vehaemunah is all about koyach hapoil benifal. There always has to be the koyach hapoil, the power of the poil, the one who's acting, which is Hashem benifal in the created action which is being acted upon. Tamid kasi lach, to give it life, or l'kaimai, and to give it existence. Vehein b'chines oisis hadibor, and what is that energy which gives it existence constantly? That is the oisis hadibor, the words, masar mamorish behem nivru, of the 10 utterances with which everything was created. So in Perek Aleph, we talked about this idea. We brought down a medrash. The medrash says that was based on the pasuk Lo'ilam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzav B'Shamayim, that Hashem's words are constantly in the heavens and also in the earth to sustain them. That was we brought it down from the Baal Shem Tov, but as we mentioned also, is brought down in the medrash. And Nasav and Ishma and Kabbalah Hina Kabbalah, right? If that's what it says in the medrash, and if that's what the Baal Shem Tov says, we accept that the Hashem's the words of Asar Bamaris are constantly within every single creation in order to give it existence and life. But in this Perek, the Alter Rebbe is explaining why. Why is it? In other words, yeah, we can lift up our hands and say, okay, we accept. But why? Why does it have to be that way? Why is it that something which Hashem created 5,780 years ago still requires the Asar Mamaris to keep it going? And that's what Alter Rebbe explains over here, that we are used, in our paradigm, we're used to the fact that when we create something, so it no longer requires our attention. And therefore we go and we erroneously apply that also to Hashem and assume that Hashem created the world so many years ago, and ever since the world is running on autopilot. So here the Alter Rebbe is introducing this new idea, this new concept, which is that no, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Because since Hashem is creating something from nothing, that's the biggest chiddush that there can be. Before the world was created, there was nothing. You know, we talk about created something from nothing. It's not as if there was something that was called nothing and Hashem transformed that nothing into something. You know, something from nothing. No, nothing means there was nothing. And when we say nothing, there was nothing physical, there was nothing spiritual. Everything that there is came about from nowhere, from nothing. That means nothing really exists because this doesn't naturally exist. It's not like a piece of silver that, at least to our eyes, it seems that it exists. Nothing actually exists. So what's forcing it into existence at every single moment? That's the Dvar Hashem. It's only logical to say that if Hashem creates something from nothing, and following everything that we said earlier, that when something is a chidush, it requires a constant force to keep that chidush going. Is there any greater chidush than the creation of Yesh Mi'ayin, than the creation of something from nothing? And since that's the biggest chiddush imaginable, much greater than the chiddush of Kriyas Yamsov again. Because by Kriyas Yamsov, all you were doing was changing a nature. From one created nature to another nature. But even that is a chiddush, which was a big enough chiddush to require the constant flow of energy. How much more so, the biggest chiddush possible, which is that something appears out of nowhere that obviously needs a constant koyach to keep it going.
People ask what was before Hashem. What will answer?
That's a great question, but it's not really relevant to here. We could talk about it after class, but saying that that's not relevant to what we're talking about here.
But that rule, that if something is going against its nature, you have to keep on doing it, that is part of, that's a rule in creation.
Firais?
No.
When Hashem created, it must be when Hashem created the world, we use it. You can't take a rule from after post-creation and say, Elamai must be, that's why he did it. No, that's all under the umbrella of what he created. How can you make Yesh Mayim first? Why don't you start from the beginning? There's no rule in creation.
Okay, you're forcing my hand. I wasn't planning on going here, but shouldn't be surprised that you asked this question. So the truth is, this is a question that Chassidim have grappled with from when the Alter Rebbe wrote it. You're applying the laws of logic to Hashem, and Hashem is a Kil Yachol. So you're saying that logically, something which is a Chiddush requires a constant force to keep it going. But since Hashem is a Kil Yachol, so therefore He has the ability to be able to create the world and say, keep on going without me. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah.
Kol Yachol means He's not bound by the laws of logic, which obviously He created. Right. So the truth is that Chassidim were turning a little, twisting a little in pretzels, trying to figure out the answer to this question, and different answers were proposed. And then the Rebbe came along, and in a very deep sikha in the early 80s, the Rebbe, based on some words of the Rambam, the beginning of the Rambam, he says in the Hilchos Yisei Torah, he says, "V'im yala al hadas," that the world doesn't need Hashem. It's an interesting expression, "V'im yala al hadas," and the Rebbe says that yala al hadas is exactly what you're saying. That you're going higher than das, and you're saying that the whole idea that we're saying that the world needs Hashem is if you're following the rules of Seichel. But what if das? What if I'm going to want to move a little higher and say that Hashem can do whatever He wants, and therefore Hashem could create a world which is also self-subsistent? Yep. And the Rebbe says that's absolutely correct. Hashem could have done that. But that goes against everything that He did. Meaning to say, we know that if you learn Chassidus and if you learn Kabbalah, then you're aware that Hashem created the world following a system called Ishtalshalos. And the reason why He did that is because He wanted that the system, the spiritual system of the creation of the world should be logical. And we should be able to grasp Hashem and therefore be able to have some sort of understanding in Him and thereby be able to arrive at Avas Hashem and a Yiras Hashem. And that's the entire system, because otherwise we don't need any of the higher worlds, we don't need any of the spheres. Hashem could have said, poof, I want a world, and a world appears. And then the whole Chassidus and Kabbalah and the whole study of spiritual cosmology, if you want to call that, wouldn't exist. But we know that Hashem didn't do it that way. How do we know? Because we have in the Torah. The Torah tells us that, especially in Kabbalah, that there's all these spiritual systems, which means that Hashem wanted to make it as logical as possible. Based on this foundation, the understanding that whatever Hashem did, He wanted that it should work according to the rules. Based on that, we can deduce that which Alter Rebbe is saying over here. But ultimately, can Hashem, theoretically, could He have created a world that was self-subsistent? The answer is, of course, yes, that Hashem could do anything. That was a very groundbreaking sikha at the time when the Rebbe said it, because it really ran contrary to what Chassidim had thought for 6 generations, that no, it's an impossibility to envision this idea of a world that's self-subsistent. And came along the Rebbe and said, there's nothing that's impossible for Hashem, including that which is impossible for you to envision, because it logically doesn't make sense. As explained here in Tanya, Hashem could have done it also, but that's not the way Hashem chose to do it. Within our system, again, we can't work outside of the system. Within the system Hashem created, this is the logical conclusion that we must arrive at.
What was it, 1980?
No, it was I think in 1984.
Oh, yeah.
So going back to what we started today's lesson with, we talked about the people who believe in Hashem, but they have difficulty accepting the idea of miracles. And they have a difficulty also accepting the idea of Hashgacha Pratis, the idea that Hashem is micromanaging everything that goes on in the world. And as you said, and you said correctly, you said these people probably haven't thought it through completely, because if you're going to go to them and you're going to go and say, why don't you believe there can be miracles? So you never saw a miracle. Okay, that's fine. I accept that you never saw a miracle. But at the same time, if you believe in Hashem, why don't you believe that miracles happen? So they probably won't even know what to answer. But what's really going on in their head is that they're saying, yes, Hashem created the world, but they're comparing it to everything that's a creation by a human being. And when a human being creates something, so that that which is created no longer requires the attention and the constant actions and the constant power of the one who created it. And they're assuming the same thing is about Hashem. Okay, so once you have that, so Hashem created the world. The world now continues to exist on its own. And are you really going to tell me that Hashem is busy looking at the world, this big Hashem who created the world, and is busy, that's what he's busy with, oh, let me make a miracle over here, let me do this. In other words, theoretically, they believe that if Hashem wanted to do a miracle, he could do a miracle. But it's like, to them, it's like, imagine I say, okay, so the President of the United States, he stopped by your house yesterday because there was a little pothole in your sidewalk, and he paved it. For them, the idea of a miracle is the same thing as that kind of imagination. Hashem created the world, and that was a pretty incredible feat for him. But think about the vastness of the world and the cosmos, and to say that and by the way, he set it up that things run, and he doesn't interfere. So they have a difficult time. And as you pointed out, especially since in their experience, they haven't really seen that too often. So therefore their assumption is because, and by the way, as we'll talk about this more also as we continue in Shaar Hayichud Vehaemunah, this is the greatness of Hashem, is that he created a machine that is so well oiled and so well run and seems to run by itself so well that we don't even that we can question whether or not there's anyone who's operating it. So we look at a world and everything seems to run naturally. I believe in Hashem. Yeah, I do accept that Hashem created. And by the way, for him to create such a well-oiled machine in a world that runs so fabulously and so incredibly is an incredible feat. But ultimately, I don't believe that then he interferes. And in their mind, that's not there is no contradiction. What is missing? So Alter Rebbe says, your problem is that if you look at the beginning of the page, the Alter Rebbe says, "V'gilui shoyrish teusam." I'm going to give you the shoyrish, the source of their mistake. Your mistake isn't that you don't believe in miracles. That's what you think. You think you don't believe in miracles. There's a much deeper issue that's going on over here. There's a source. There's a shoyrish here, which I'm giving you over here. And the shoyrish is that you're comparing Hashem's actions and Hashem's handiwork to the handiwork of a human being. And therefore, you're making the assumption that there's no need for Hashgacha Pratis. Why is Hashem busy looking at every single component of my life? And no, he created the world and he did a darn good job, and now it's running. Okay, sometimes things don't work out so well. It's not perfect, the world, but it's relatively good. But once you're to understand this idea that Hashem is intimately involved with every single aspect of this world and every single speck of this world at every single moment of time, because Hashem has to constantly be providing the energy for every single minute detail of this world, then Hashgacha Pratis becomes a natural, an obvious consequence of that. And the fact that miracles happen, why would that be surprising? If anything, at this point, we should start being surprised that there are less miracles than there should be. The question now would become the other way around. If Hashem is, and that's something which we're going to have to talk about later on in Shaar Hayichud Vehaemunah. But if Hashem is intimately involved in every moment, in every single aspect of creation, then of course, everything that's happening, He's managing it every single time. Of course there are miracles. Of course there's a Hashgacha Pratis. So that's what we started today's class saying, that last week we gave the foundation. The foundation is that there's perpetual creation. There are many consequences of perpetual creation. One of them is this idea of Hashgacha Pratis and miracles. And it gives us a different understanding of Hashgacha Pratis and miracles. Hashgacha Pratis doesn't mean, as so many are bound to think, that Hashem is up in the heaven and Hashem is looking down at the world constantly. In other words, I'm talking about people who believe in Hashgacha Pratis. Let's not even talk about people who don't believe in Hashgacha Pratis. Let's say people who believe in Hashgacha Pratis. They have this imagination. Hashem is sitting over there and He's looking down, maybe with the binoculars, and He's like, I see that, Hashgacha Pratis, that person lost his wallet. Okay, let me arrange now. That person now is going to go over there, and then he's going to, and we're going to work it out, they're going to get it over there. Or a miracle over here. That also is an immature understanding of Hashgacha Pratis. Hashgacha Pratis means that at every single moment, every single circumstance is being recreated at the moment. So of course Hashem is coordinating everything, not because there's some sort of external power that Hashem is exerting upon this world to make Hashgacha Pratis, but that's essentially, the world is being recreated at every single moment in conformance with Hashem's will, the way He wants it to be. So of course everything is Hashgacha Pratis.
Yes. If everything's being recreated constantly, so how does a person have free will? I mean, every time, how would you?
Because your free will is also being recreated constantly.
Well, it's a little bit abstract.
And obviously, it goes without saying, when we're talking about Hashgacha Pratis, you know, we say, give me an example of Hashgacha Pratis. What's that example of Hashgacha Pratis? So everyone thinks back, okay, 3 years ago, I was gonna go to sleep and I decided I'm not in the mood, so I went out and I bumped into someone and it turned out I hadn't seen him in 10 years and he needed something, What is Hashgacha Pratis? Hashgacha Pratis is you woke up this morning and you had breakfast and you davened, or you davened, you had breakfast, you went to work, you made a few dollars, what? Yeah, Hashgacha Pratis is not, but it's almost become a synonym. Hashgacha Pratis is for something which is strange, something's out of the ordinary, wherein we see that Hashem, so to say, intervened. Hashgacha Pratis is every moment of life. Now, yes, sometimes we see Hashgacha Pratis more. Those strange stories are instances where the Hashgacha Pratis it hit us in the face, whether we liked it or not. And we all have those kinds of stories. But Hashgacha Pratis is every moment. Why? Because at every moment Hashem is constantly recreating the entire world. And how is Hashem recreating the world? What is this energy with which Hashem is creating the world? Well, just like at the very first moment when there was nothing, it's obvious that Hashem had to say the Asar Bamaris in order to give the energy. That necessity remains from here on. And this, the Alter Rebbe says, is the meaning of the pasuk we say in davening, V'ata mechaye es kulam. We say to Hashem, V'ata, you give life to everything. Al tikri mechaye, as Chazal say, don't read mechaye ela mahava. You Hashem, not you give life to everything, but you also create everything. Dahainu yesh miyayin. That you create everything, something from nothing. And the word V'ata is very interesting. The word V'ata, the Alter Rebbe says, is made up. The word Ata, hein bechinis ha'ois yisma aleph ataf. Ata is aleph through taf. Vahei, and the hey at the end, he hey mitzois hapeh, is the five, as we mentioned, the 5 different groupings of words. Makar ha'esius, which is the source of the letters. So va'ata mahaves kulam, you create all of them, and how do you create all of them? Through the ata, through the aleph, through the taf, and also with its makar, which is the hey. If I remember correctly, actually, in the pasuk, the kri is aleph taf, and the ksiv is the ksiv is the aleph taf, and the kri is aleph taf hey. What's revealed is the aleph taf, and the hey is the source which is hidden behind it. Of late, I don't know, it's become more of a regular phenomenon that we connect what we're talking about to the parsha, and it's amazing how every single week there are connections.
Hashgacha Pratis.
Hashgacha Pratis, yeah.
Mikra, how do you spell?
Sorry, what?
How do you spell Mikra? Rak Hashem.
Right. That's going back to the last page, the Tzirufim and the Chilufim and the Tmuras.
Kara Mikra.
Yeah.
It's like that.
So in this week's parsha, okay, before we get to the pasuk in this week's parsha, it's based on, let's back up a little. In the Gemara and Baba Kama, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The whole sugya and Daf Chaf Beis. Whether Eisha is Mishum Chitzav or Eisha is Mishum Mamoinai. Which means that we know that in the beginning of Baba Kama we say that there are 4 obvious nazik and 4 different types of damages for which a person is chayiv to pay, and one of them is hever, one of them is fire. And the question is, why are you chayiv to pay? If you light a fire, why are you chayiv to pay? So Rabbi Yochanan says that Eisha mishum chitzav, that if you light a fire, it's as if you're throwing an arrow. You're lighting the fire, it's as if you're throwing an arrow at somebody. And just like when you throw an arrow at something, even though you didn't touch it with your hands, you didn't go and literally smash it. It's something that came from koychay, from your koyach, but nevertheless you're chayiv. The same thing is also, if you light a fire, also, it's like any damage the fire does, it's like you shot an arrow, and it did its damage. And Rish Lakish argues, Rish Lakish says, Eishay mishum mamoinai, that just like if your property damages, let's say you have an animal and the animal damages, then you're chayiv, even though it wasn't you who did it, so therefore your eish is mishum mamoinai. And the Gemara and the Mefarshim talks about different nafkeminas lahalacha, what's the difference between whether or not it's mitzad chitzav or mitzad the money. What's interesting is that in the Gemara, in Masechtas Tainis, the Gemara says The Rabbi Yochanan said that had I been there when they instituted the fast of Tisha B'Av, I would have instituted that instead of the fast being on Tisha B'Av, that the fast should be instituted on the 10th of Asir B'Av. Why? Because the fire was lit towards evening, and most of the Beis HaMikdash burnt the following day. And therefore, it's more logical for it to have been now. Obvious question that people ask is, the Mefarshim asks, is 1 second, this is a stira, one from another. According to Rish Lakish, it makes sense, because when a person goes, and when a person's animal, let's say I have an ox, and the ox goes and gores another animal. When is my Zman HaChiyuv? When did I become Chayiv? When my ox goes, because it's my animal, so it's an extension of me, so when my animal goes, that's when my Chiyuv happens. But if you're going to say that Eishav Mishum Chitzav, when is the moment of Chiyuv? When as soon as the person shoots the arrow, because afterwards, when the actual damage happened, the person, you could say, is almost, the person B'chlal, he couldn't stop the damage from happening at that time. But what happens, when you shoot the arrow at that moment, you take full responsibility for anything that happens with the arrow. It's as if all the damage happened the moment you shot the arrow. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that Eishav Mishum Chitzav, that the reason why you're chayiv for lighting a fire is because you shot the arrow. Rabbi Yochanan, he's the one who should have said that the fast should be on Tisha B'Av and not on the 10th of Av. Why? Because it should follow when the fire was lit, because that's when the arrow was shot. And once the arrow was shot, everything that happens afterwards is only just a consequence of the shooting of the arrow. The moment of chiyuv is when the arrow is shot. So why is it that Rabbi Yochanan, who says Eishav Mishum Chitzav, is the same one who says the fast day of Tisha B'Av should be on the 10th day of Av? And the answer that's brought down is based on a pasuk in this week's parsha. And this week's parsha, we say, Im shanoisi, it's actually in tonight's chitas, Im shanoisi berak charbi, v'soicheis b'mishpat yadi. That my hand holds on to the mishpat. So Rashi says on this pasuk, in v'soicheis b'mishpat yadi, so Rashi says, that loikim midas basar vadam, midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Hashem is different. That when a person shoots an arrow, the moment the arrow leaves the person's the person's bow, the person no longer controls the arrow. But Hashem, even when he shoots an arrow, he's still holding on to the arrow the entire time. And that's what it means. V'soicheis b'mishpat yadi. My hand keeps on holding on to the mishpat. It never leaves go. Even when I shoot, Hashem is saying, even when I shoot the arrow, I hold on. So therefore, we understand why it is that Rabbi Yochanan holds that the fast day is on the 10th, even though he holds Eishav Mishum Chitzav, because by a human being, Taka, the moment the arrow leaves, since the person loses control, so the moment of Chiyuv stops. But by the Eibishter, since obviously Ki Be'esh Hitzata, we know, even though that it was the people, there was the people of Bavel and of Rami who lit it, but ultimately Ki Be'esh Hitzata, Hashem is the one who lit the Beis HaMikdash on fire, and since Hashem lit it on fire, Hashem never lost control, and therefore, since most of the damage happened on Tisha, on the Asir B'Av, therefore, the fast is on Asir B'Av. Sorry?
It's on Tisha B'Av.
And therefore it's on, therefore even though it's on Tisha B'Av, but Rabbi Yochanan, therefore he said that had he been there, he'd have done it on Asir B'Av. Now what's the connection to what we're talking about over here? Some people look at the world that Hashem shot an arrow 5,780 years ago. Hashem shot an arrow, and then wherever it is, it is. And some people might even think that if Hashem wants, he even has the power to go on to catch up to the arrow and do something. But ultimately, Hashem did an act, and that act now is working on its own, is doing whatever it does on its own. He put the world into motion, and he put it, and it's governed by the laws of nature. And like when you shoot an arrow, comes along the pasuk in this week's parsha and says, no, v'seiches b'mishpat yadi. By the Eibishter, there's no such thing. He never loses control of the situation. He never leaves go of the arrow. And why is that? That's based on what we're talking about here in Tanya. Once we have the understanding that by Hashem everything is happening anew every single moment, so it's understood there's no such thing as saying, well, because Hashem lit the fire on the 9th day of Av, so therefore on the 10th day of Av, the fire just continued. No, the fire didn't just continue. If the fire continued on the 10th day of Av, it's because the fire was being recreated on the 10th day of Av. And if the fire is being recreated on the 10th day of Av, and most of the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on the 10th day of Av, that's why Rabbi Yochanan had said that had he been there, he'd have misaken it to be 10th day of Av.
So why they didn't do 9 and 10?
We're very happy they didn't. We're not complaining.
It would be too
You can
hard
fast
for
2 days.
people to fast 2 days.
If we have to, we do it. It was very easy yesterday.
What you did in people Rambam today, the Rambam like in Tainis, you don't make a Tainis 2 days one after that.
Yeah.
See?
Okay.
But interestingly, the Rebbe ends off that sikha because the Rebbe everything's positive. So he says, we know that there is one time when taka things are out of Hashem's control. And why is that? Because Hashem willed it that way. And what is that? We know that when there's a nevuah. So if there's a nevuah, lira, there's a nevuah which is a negative nevuah. So that can always be changed. And that's what it means Hashem holds on to the V'seiches b'mishpat. Midas hadin, he's always holding on to it because it can always change, even if there was a nevuah. And we know that from
Yirmiyahu.
Impossible.
2 days ago. Right? We had it in after Yonah. The Yonah comes and he goes and he gives a nevuah. He says another 40 days Nineveh is being destroyed. And guess what? It changed. They did tshuva and it changed. And in fact, that's what Yonah said afterwards. He says, that's why I didn't want to go. I knew you'd change your mind, even though it was a nevuah. Because that's the rule. The rule is that if there's a nevuah, al harav, if there's a nevuah, a negative nevuah, that can always be changed. However, if there's a nevuah in a positive sense, then it can't be changed. Can't be changed. And that's why we know that the mitzvah is that we have to taka when there's a Navi comes along, so we're supposed to check out the Navi to see whether he's accurate. And how do you check him out? You tell us something that's going to be. And the halacha is that if the Navi gives a negative forecast, gives a negative nevuah, even if it doesn't happen, that's not a proof that the Navi is a false Navi. Because it's possible that Hashem changed his mind because Yidden did tshuva, the Yidden davened, or whoever, not even Yidden, even Goyim, as we see by Nineveh. But if a Navi says a nevuah l'toiva, says something positive is going to happen, and it doesn't happen, then we know for sure, 100%, there's a Navi sheker. Because once there's a nevuah l'toiva, then it's out of Hashem's hands. Then taka, we don't say v'soiches b'mishpat yadi. That's only b'negei to midas adin. We say that Hashem always retains the right to pull back the arrow even at the last moment. But when it comes to midas hachesed, once the arrow was shot, the arrow was moving. And just like when the arrow when a human being shoots an arrow, so we say the whole thing really happens the moment the arrow was shot. Everything is already included in that potential. Now it's just a matter of being revealed what happened. But the whole thing really happened at that moment when the person shot the arrow. The same thing is when it comes to nevuah l'teva.
I don't remember who said that, but if a Navi, somebody said, in this and this date the Mashiach come, yitrakvu atzmotav. I don't remember when.
So there's definitely, we know that the Nevi'im are full of this, of the idea that Mashiach is coming. There is going to be a Geula. That's for sure.
But the date,
okay, we don't know the date, but the Nevi'im are filled with the Nevuahs about the Geula, which means that the arrow was already shot. If the arrow was already shot, then really it all exists. It's just a matter of not revealing it. Just like in the din of Eshav Mishum Chitzav, once the arrow was shot, in potential, everything already happened. The Gula is already all there. It's all waiting to happen. We just have to bring it into the Poil, but we have to know that it's already there. It's already a certainty. It was already set into motion. The arrow was already shot off, and now we just have to go and bring it into Gilui.
We're almost there.
What?
We're almost there.
But we have a mamar in the Gemara that says that if somebody speaks improperly about a man and woman who get married, even if there's a gezeira of 7 years,
but that's not a nevuah. That's not a nevuah.
It's not a nevuah.
No, nevuah is a totally different, because a nevuah, the idea of a nevuah, nifs v'saim, it brings it down into this physical world. A nevuah, according to Allah, it can't change. A gzar din in heaven could change. In fact, that's the whole idea of kovish nevuah. In other words, whatever, that's going off on the side. But Zechariah Hanavi, that's why they killed him. They had a tie on him. And why did you say the nevuah, the negative nevuah? Because when you say something, it brings it down into this world. Mm-hmm. And then it has to happen. Kolzman, that it's not brought down in nevuah, it's not on the same level, it's not on that level of ados at all. This is something that Rambam talks about, this that there's something about bringing something into this world, bringing energy into this world. And when you bring the energy into this world, then Itaka is already here and becomes a reality. So by the fact that we have a Navi, the Nevi'im, the Nevi Aguli, Yeshaya, and all those Nevuas, that means it's already happened, the energy is already here, and now we just have to reveal it. And Rit Hashem will continue, and we'll finish this Perek after Simchas Torah.